About this all week. Looking forward to this tonight. Tonight's guest is Stevland Ambrose. I always get that. That is such an unusual name, my man. How are you?
I'm good, Clyde. How are you doing?
How did you get a name like Stevland? Where does that come from?
Well, it's kind of a long story. I'll try and give you the short version. It's actually Stevie Wonder's real name.
Oh, shut up! I didn't know that.
Yep. Yep. My birth name is Stephen, and I hated being called Steve. I was living in Vancouver when I realized that his name was Stevland. His real name is Stevland. And I thought, man, I'd love to change my name to Stevland, but then I thought that's way too flaky. And then I moved to Nelson.
And people are
And
just
back
flaky
then,
there.
yeah, everybody back then, everybody was named like Raven or Moonbeam or Waterfall. So I said, okay, fine, I'm Stevland, and people said, wow, what a great name.
Oh, that's
So I
hilarious.
legally changed my name.
Oh, nice. Okay, well that's fair. That's fair. Anyway, I brought you on because you've been covering the Coutts 4 and that situation there. How did you get onto that trail? Because most people, including myself, have been. There's so much to talk about in Canada. There's so much going on. You're a BC resident as I am, and somehow you found yourself going down this rabbit hole of what happened to these four guys in Coutts, Alberta during the Freedom Convoy.
Yeah, so well, right off the top, I'd like to clarify I'm not a journalist. It's very flattering that you've called me the journalist, and I've been called that several times recently, which is kind of amazing. Our mutual friend Alex reminded me that it's a very low bar these days, so I suppose I could call myself a journalist.
Well, anybody gonna be? I think it's award-winning journalist is like the new one. That's where to
Right.
go.
I haven't won any awards just yet, but
Well,
I'm
no,
gonna
you don't have to win
maybe
any
come up
like
with some.
special awards for journalism. Is like you could have got like an ice skating championship in grade 2, and
I haven't won any awards in my entire life, so
okay,
I'm
we'll
gonna have
have to
to
work on that.
figure something out.
Maybe get you in a pie
But
eating contest or something.
so to get back to your question,
Okay.
like many people, I was really intrigued by the Freedom Convoy, and what kind of struck me right off the bat was a lot of my friends and family were saying, people were posting things on social media saying these guys are white supremacists or these guys are racist, and I was just blown away by how much vitriol was thrown at them right out of the gate. And so I just found myself defending them more and more. And then, of course, the Ottawa protests went on for 3 weeks, and there weren't any incidences at all
But
that
like
I
they were
would.
talking about the entirety of all of these people. We're talking tens of thousands of people that were involved in the Freedom Convoy, and they're all
Yeah,
racists. Like they're all
yeah,
misogynists, and even though they're
yeah.
they're multi faceted, like there was people from every walk of life that at that protest, but somehow people bought this narrative that they're all somehow racists.
It was amazing. I mean, there was one guy with a full face balaclava with a Confederate flag, and he was chased. There's a video of him being chased out of the crowd, and then there was like a small pack of guys who were all wearing those Hawaiian luas, and
Okay.
it's such a false flag. Like literally, it's a false flag. These guys, one of them unfurled a swastika flag for literally like it couldn't have been more than a minute or two. And it just so happened that there were like three professional photographers just positioned right in the right spot to take photos of this flag right outside I think it was a Chateau Frontenac, is that what it's called? The hotel where all the police were staying.
Mm-hmm.
And so they just used those two flags to besmirch everybody who participated in that protest. It was amazing. The most amazing thing for me was just how easy it is to pull this kind of thing off in Canada.
It
But then,
is.
so flash ahead to when the 24 hours before the Emergencies Act was invoked, 13 people were arrested in Coutts, Alberta, at the border blockade, one of several blockades that sprung up throughout Canada in support of the Freedom Convoy. And four of the men were accused of plotting to kill RCMP, and it was said that they had a cache of guns. And initially, the word was from the organizers of that protest. Initially, they said, "We don't know who these guys are. We don't condone this type of behavior. We can't believe this happened, and we're going to voluntarily shut down the entire protest." And so when I saw that, like it was kind of gutting. It was like, wow, is this actually happening? Like the thing that they've said this would lead to, maybe it's actually happening now. So that was my
I
first.
recall that because
kind of,
it caught me off guard. And I remember hearing and reading articles that were even talking about a manifesto that later never existed. And this is what it really is the danger of like actual fake news, because there is actual fake news out there. They're
Absolutely.
quick to go on a rumor and say that they've heard this thing, and then the police will even go and say, well, I heard about it from this publication, and then it becomes truth because now the police are reporting on the thing being reported on. So
exactly,
the manifesto turned out to be one of those things. It didn't exist, it never happened. And then we hear the story, and I get it. I get the concept for all those people that were there. They were as soon as the narrative got put on them that they were, anti-government, trying to form a conspiracy to commit awful acts, they're like, yeah, no, I'm not anything to do with that. I'm out of here. I'm not. It was a great ploy to get them to diffuse the situation, in my opinion.
Right. Yeah, and so a lot of people, even in their communities, I mean, a lot of people took a step back from these men, and even today, I would say there's still people who are still just coming around, even with all the exposure, all of the recent exposure, like Tucker. A lot of people are still inclined to believe these guys are automatically guilty because of the accusations. But for me, I think the biggest thing. Well, I remember initially seeing, footage of their initial court appearances, and there were huge throngs of supporters outside the court, and that kind of threw me off because I thought these guys were like terrible, unknown, kind of a pack of like people that snuck into the sort of protest, and it turned out that they had lots of support. And then
was it all support from?
as time went on,
was it the people who were at the protest that were their supporters, or was it like a completely different crowd?
I'm not sure. It's hard for me to gauge like what the percentage would have been, like how many of the people who were outside the court at that time had been at the protest. If I had to guess, I would say a lot of the people that I'm referring to early on were more from like the Christian groups, like the pastor. I should know his name. Is Artur
Pulowski.
I have a feeling that a lot of them might have been associated with that or the Dutch church, I think.
Okay.
I should really know the details about it. But as time went on and there were more hearings, you probably familiar with the actual journalist named Mocha Barajan.
I do know who Mocha is. Yeah, I follow him on Twitter.
Yeah. So he's been going to all these hearings, and he's been interviewing people outside of the court. And that's what really drew me in, was seeing some really, I mean, there's lots of very colorful people that show up at these hearings, but there's also a lot of very intelligent, well-spoken people who are definitely not just there to support people without any sort of rationale behind it. Like, there are people who believe these men are innocent. They're good people. They're open-hearted, fine citizens. And so seeing people like that supporting these men and articulating statements on their behalf really piqued my interest. And I just found myself getting more and more involved in sort of meeting people online who were associated. And ultimately it led to going to Lethbridge for the last week of hearings.
So for people who don't know this story, or like what are we even getting into? These four guys. These four guys were charged with these heinous crimes of plotting, conspiring to murder police officers or RCMP officers. This is the original charge, and then they're thrown away in jail, like lock them up, throw away the key kind of thing. There's no, I don't know if there's a trial date set, but they've been basically waiting for their trial without bail, not granted bail, based on some trumped up stuff that they're part of this organized terrorist organization. Um, can you tell me more about that?
Yeah, that's a really important point. Of course, it's highly unusual in Canada for people to not get bail. Even people who are charged with actually killing cops get bail in Canada.
Mm-hmm.
All of these men would qualify for bail under the normal prerequisites. They're not flight risks. They have people that will vouch for them. But in the case of these four men, the two different judges decided that these men, if their crimes, the crimes that they're accused of are so severe that if they were allowed to be released on bail, it would bring disrepute upon the court system. Which, of course, I would make the opposite argument. I would say I should clarify that two actually have been recently released, so it makes it a little bit difficult to
Right, and we'll get to that.
talk about this because it was four men.
Yeah, it's now two.
So four men have been in remand for almost 2 years. Two of them just recently got released. I would make the argument that holding all four of them, now two, for this long without bail, that in and of itself is what is bringing disrepute upon the justice system, in my opinion.
Yeah, absolutely. Like, what's this whole concept of a speedy trial? You have this right to and to face your accusers. These kinds of things. Now, I understand that there's a publication ban on any journalists that are allowed into the courtroom to cover this.
Technically, it applies to anyone. It applies to the public too.
Okay, it applies to the public. If you go
so
into,
you do have to be careful. Yeah, like I'm not an actual journalist, but I can't discuss the things I've heard in court with you because we're on a podcast. I could probably talk to you in person about it, but
right. So there's certain things that you're not even at liberty to talk about because you were there.
Yeah.
Oh, that sucks.
Yeah. So I mean, I feel comfortable talking about the broader strokes, but you can't actually talk about the things you heard in court.
Right.
And that's a new. In this case, the defense actually asked for the publication ban.
That's what I was so shocked about.
They're concerned
that it was the defense that asked for it, not the Crown prosecutor.
Yeah, well, you have to understand that it's these accusations, right? The CBC, for instance, have published really horrific things about these men that aren't even true. So at some point, their defense team said, geez, we're never going to have an impartial jury. It's going to be impossible, given that there's still months and months in this case. It turns out years to go. So that's why the defense itself asked for the publication ban. But as it happens, there's been a recent ruling from the Supreme Court or from the Superior Court that says any pretrial hearing in Canada now will be subject to a publication ban. So it's going to be standard from now on until any pretrial hearing. So not the actual trial itself.
Right. That sounds concerning, actually.
Yeah, I mean, I don't really have an opinion myself. I mean, I could see how it would sound concerning, but I do think there's a pretty valid argument as well in favor of that, and it's the same argument that the defense team made. It's just comes down to allowing all of this stuff to stay out of the court of the public opinion until the actual trial starts.
Well, it seems like that's where it goes immediately anyway. It goes right to Twitter, where everybody's got an opinion on these
Yeah,
guys. And I
yeah.
mean, I call it the hyperbolic chamber because that's exactly what Twitter is. Like you go there and people don't have a neutral stance usually. It's very one way or the other, and it's very polarized. Uh, People either think these guys should be locked up forever, or they think they should be freed immediately and that they're saints, right? There's not a lot of in between, and I'm sure the truth is somewhere in the middle there on the whole thing. Obviously, these guys were involved in protest of some sort. There were guns collected. I don't know what the circumstances are of that. Is that something you're at liberty to talk about?
Yeah, I mean, I don't really have a lot to say on that subject. I'm not a gun expert, and there's not a lot of information available, actually. I think most Canadians have seen the photo, the initial photo that was released right away
Mm-hmm.
of a table covered in guns and a bunch of items on the floor. And I've shown that photo to friends of mine. I have a couple of friends who know a lot more about guns than I do, and the consensus generally is that you can't really tell. It's hard to tell from a photo like that, like what you're actually looking at. I guess part of the problem is, you know, uh, I'm this is all way over my head. I don't know anything about guns, but guys will buy just simple rifles and they'll zoop them up, to make them look like, heavy duty automatic weapons.
Yeah,
And
they call it tactical, right? And it's supposed to
right,
look
right,
cool,
right.
but it's
So
it's not about it being functional like a military weapon. Because that's the charge here is that they have military weapons. It turns out everything that was in this photograph were all legally acquired firearms. There's no
I believe, if I remember correctly, there's one gun that may not have been properly registered. I'm not sure, but the vast majority of them are just, yeah, they're actually like a nothing burger, from what I understand. And what a lot of people say, you and I are both in BC. It's a bit of a different culture than Alberta. Um, People in Alberta, like, they look at that photo, they're like, so what? I mean, keep in mind it was those guns. Those guns have become associated with the four men, the Coutts Four, but those guns are belong to potentially 13 people. So,
right.
and we don't know. Nobody's released the information to specify which guns belong to which person. So it's really anybody's guess. But most Albertans, I think, or at least a lot of rural Albertans, would look at that photo and say, "So what? Like, this is." There's individuals who are perfectly law-abiding people who have that many guns or more to themselves
Yeah,
in Alberta.
absolutely. And well, I mean, you're within your right to own them. And I mean, the idea is that I mean, well, the idea shouldn't be that you have to prove your motive for wanting to own firearms. I mean, it's like anything. Do you have to prove why you buy a car? Like, do you have various purposes for owning this car? No, you buy it because it's a machine and it does a thing. But so this,
I think it's important to just I like to be fair to the prosecution as well,
mhm,
and I think the argument that there's a valid argument to be made that you know people shouldn't bring guns to a protest. Now, they weren't at the actual protest. That's where it gets confusing, because
right,
the protest itself was basically in the town of Coutts, and people were staying in the town of Coutts. So I think a lot of those guns were probably seized in people's trailers where they were staying, and I would still, say that perhaps they shouldn't have brought the guns with them in their trailers to Coutts when they're going to a protest, but to then make the leap that they were intending harm, I think is erroneous.
right, right, and that's I think the whole purpose of this photograph is to to set that stage
to scare Canadians.
to scare
Yeah,
people.
I think Canada is a country. We actually, I didn't realize this. We're actually seventh in the world in terms of per capita gun ownership, which kind of blew
Really?
my mind.
Wow.
But the difference is between us and say the U.S. is we don't actually kill each other with guns, but we have a lot of guns in Canada. But I think most rural Canadians and definitely myself, like it is a little shocking to see a photo like that. You just think like, wow, it looks like a militia.
Right, and that's sort of the idea that I mean, if I was to run a propaganda outlet, I think that would be, right on the top of it is, hey, let's get some visuals together that paint these guys in a really,
If you
really
look at
bad
that
way.
photo again, sorry to interrupt you, but
Yeah,
I mean, on the bottom there you have a machete. Like, why is that there?
yeah. There's
That's not
nothing
illegal. You don't
illegal
need a
about
permit.
owning a machete.
Yeah,
It's a garden tool.
you have little walkie talkies down here by that green vest.
Yeah.
Just a bunch of random things. It was like they grabbed everything that could potentially look like, I don't know,
Well, and the
like
vests too,
scary, I
right? The
suppose.
vests too, they have that feel that like, oh, are you going to war by wearing a
Yeah,
vest kind of thing?
yeah. And again, I talked to some friends who know more than I do about this kind of stuff, and they said you actually can't tell anything by looking at the vest. It depends on what the vest is actually filled with. So
Right.
it could just be, my buddy said that could just be something you wear to go fishing, right, with your tackle. So,
Yeah, that
or it
makes
could
sense.
actually be body armor. You can't tell from the photo.
Well, I mean, what was it like? Toronto police, they had, or I think it was Calgary police. They had a photograph recently where they're they were what was it, the police, or it was like their transit security, I think it was, and they were all decked out in this gear, and they had the plate carrier and all that stuff on, and people were commenting on
Oh, wow.
that, like why are you so like militant looking for the for just transit police. This is crazy. It really is something else. And it's imagery that the whole point is, right? To make it look a certain
Yeah,
way, to invoke a
yeah.
certain emotion. And that's what we've always called propaganda. Edward Bernays is famous for saying, oh, we'll call it PR, it's public relations. It sounds a little bit better. I have a super chat here from I'm Not Your Buddy guy for $5. It says governments only confiscate weapons because what they say, what they are planning to do make you want to use them. See any historical authoritarian figure. Now, I mean, yeah, that is true. So like in historical reference, the authoritarians always wanted to confiscate the guns before any of any of the bad stuff they did, because an unarmed populace is an obedient populace, I suppose. I mean, I mean, people have reasons for wanting to own guns, and it's funny because you hear this. I heard recently on Joe Rogan, he was talking with Tom Green, who is a Canadian, but he's been removed from Canada for so many years, and Tom Green's sentiment, he still kind of had this like Canadian sentiment of like, wow, we shouldn't own guns for self-defense. That's not a legitimate reason to own a firearm. But that in America, that's the culture. That's the first and foremost thing. Yeah, you can hunt with them, and that's great, but firearms are for self-defense, and personal defense is very important. We have a completely different culture here, and to think that somebody would want to defend themselves with a firearm is like ghastly to so many out there. What do you think?
I mean, that's a big topic, but I've spent my whole life, feeling like it would be great if the U.S. could lose their guns. I mean, it would be great. And, really what it comes down to is it would be great if the U.S. could figure out how to be less violent. That's the issue. That's the real issue. It's not the guns, it's using them to kill people.
Yeah.
In the meantime, I suppose lots of liberals would love to ban all the guns in the U.S. But and I've always agreed with that my entire life until just recently, just the past few years.
Oh, really?
With all the weird things that are happening in Canada, I start to find myself saying, I hope those Americans hold on to those guns because we might need some help.
Well,
Like,
well,
honestly,
I need some help.
that's what you're alluding to, right? I
Well,
mean,
no, what I'm alert. Well, there's that, but I'm also saying that, you know, when it comes to guns and crime and all that stuff, if you were to ban all cars, yeah, the rate of car accidents would go down, but the rate of irresponsibility wouldn't. You know what I mean? It's
yeah.
kind of it's a
And that's the
misnomer.
thing. From what I understand, they did a lot to ban guns in the UK, and then all of a sudden you just had people stabbing each other and throwing acid on
Yeah,
people's faces and all
that's a new
kinds of
thing.
weird. So it's like people are still getting. I don't think the murder rate went down. In fact, I've also heard an argument that getting shot actually isn't that big a deal nowadays. If there's paramedics that come and attend to you right away, you're actually better off than getting stabbed.
Morbid thoughts. Patch Duress for $6.99 says, despite self-defense not being a right in Canada, are Canadians even legally able to obtain a firearm, long barrel or handgun? So handguns now, there's no more. You're not allowed. That's the rule. Trudeau brought that in.
Right.
So yeah, you can
Right.
still get your possession acquisition license. You can buy rifles, things like that. But the AR-15 has been it's the most popular sporting rifle in America. It's banned in Canada. You can't get one. It's not allowed.
Right.
And before that it was restricted, which means it was like heavily regulated, and it was hard to get your hands on. But now even pistols, no, you can't. There's no more sales of pistols. So people who own them currently, it's still legal to own, but they can't even transfer it to their kids. That's a thing. Light Giver for $5 says, I heard paintballs really hurt. Maybe we should purchase paintball guns. LOL. I didn't know this was gonna turn into like
I
a
did not
gun
anticipate.
the gun show. I didn't know
Yeah,
this
I
was gonna
know.
turn into this.
This is not what I had.
Yeah.
Not what
Sometimes
I
it kind of
envisioned.
devolves to this.
But
Goko Donnie for $2 says, fly fishing, hunting, my world 101. That's a thing. And we also have Patch Duress for $13.99 says, the U.S. Constitution is the reason their culture is superior factually and culturally. We don't have freedom of speech or right to bear arms. Canada has been sadly compromised from day one. So I'm going to push back on that one. So we don't have what's called freedom of speech, but we do have freedom of expression, which was supposed to, in its inception, be more encompassing than free speech. Just the concept of free speech. It was supposed to cover all forms of expression: artistic, singing, dancing, any form of art or any type of expression. It was supposed to all be covered in that. But it's a semantics thing. Maybe the Canadian founders or drafters wanted to just use different language because it sounds better. I don't know. It's there's always been this like competition between the U.S. and Canada. I'm a dual citizen. I don't see it. I like America. I think it's great.
the competition between the U.S. and Canada, I would say that Canada is competing with the U.S.
Well, yeah, it's not the
It's
other
not a
way
two-way
around. It's kind of like pat you on the head. Yeah, thanks a lot. Good job.
Yeah, it's like I feel like to be honest, in Canada, we don't really have a strong identity, a strong national identity.
Which is sad. I wish we
Pretty much
did.
the only thing we can all agree on is that we're better somehow. We're slightly better. It's like we're the US, but slightly better. We have universal Medicare, which actually used to mean something. We have clean streets, and we have good government. That used to be the promise of Canada was good government.
So we've lost all of that, and they want to change Queen Streets. They want to change them
we've lost
to
all of it.
something else. This is really
But
sad.
the US unfortunately has its own problems.
They do have their own problems.
Feels like
yeah. Wow, that's a whole other
feels
podcast.
Like if it lived up to its own constitution, it would be probably the greatest country in the history of the world.
Well, yeah, it was, and and that's the whole "Make America Great Again" slogan. And of course, you know, immediately people said, "Oh, well, that's racist because when was America ever great for Black people?" You know,
Yeah.
these concepts.
What, you just want to go back to slavery? Is that what you mean?
Yeah, it's sophistry. Like, people know that that's not what's actually intended in that, and but they want to use it to score political points. And this is what largely gets me kind of, it kind of, it makes me like, not mad, it makes me sad that people want to do that. Like, it's more about winning these political points in a you know, a mashup of words on social media or whatever, rather than actually like getting to the root cause of problems. Let's just, like, I want to win today. I want to have my win right now. And 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 it seems like people are more concerned with that than they are with anything else. They're so
It
wrapped up in
drives me
this.
crazy.
It really does.
Absolutely. Yeah, I find that all the time. People are complaining, and they love pointing fingers, and they love, you know, insulting other people, and they love solutions that really just are kind of band-aid solutions, in my opinion. And you try and get to the root cause, you try and make suggestions to like eliminate the actual root problem, and they're just not interested.
They're not interested. And this is getting back to the Coutts guys. So these four were put in prison, and well, in remand, not even in prisons, because like that would denote actually being tried and sentenced to a crime. They were put in remand, and they were locked away. And we have people on social media that praise this, and
Oh, for sure.
and we're talking about people who consider themselves liberals, like with the word liberal in it. And
Yeah.
it's completely illiberal, this concept of imprisonment, without, you know, your day in court, without a speedy trial, without any of this stuff. They're happy with these accusations. You hear this often as well with when Tamara Leach was put back in remand because of a violation of her bail conditions. They went and hunted her down across the country to put her back in jail. And the sentiment of just like joy that you hear from these characters on social media is
Yeah.
really, it's troubling. It's troubling because it, like, does nobody think that if the shoe was on the other foot, that you would at least be happy that your fellow countrymen would be up in arms with the fact that there was injustice served towards you? Like, I don't have to agree with what the Coutts Four did, for example. And it might even get into that. I don't know, because I don't know so many of the details of about them, their lives, what they stood for. Perhaps it comes out that I don't even actually like what they have to say and what they stand for. But my opinion on this whole thing is that doesn't matter. They should be able to see their day in court. They should be able to have a, you know, the right to a speedy trial. And if they're, you know, if bail is a thing that's offered in this country, they should be given the same equal opportunity to have bail until their trial comes along.
Yeah, you know, I've found myself reminding people, trying to remind people many times. Like I actually say to people, you know, I suggest you need to go back and read about the Enlightenment, and refresh yourself on what a liberal democracy is meant to be, because the, you know, the principle of being innocent until proven guilty is one of the main cornerstones of liberal democracy. And ironically, it seems like you're saying, like, it's actually liberals in this case that are rejoicing about these men being held for so long, and they say, well, they're exactly where they're meant to be,
Well, then
and they
give them a
actually seem
trial,
to
and then rejoice when they're convicted. You know what I mean? Like that's really, I want to
yeah.
shout this at the top of my lungs at these people, but then I end up just, you know, being a part of this whole anger online. You know what I mean? I guess.
Can I read a quote?
Yeah, go ahead.
This is from a woman named Janice Fiamengo. She has a YouTube channel. can't remember what it's called off the top of my head, but she's actually a professor at the University of Ottawa, of all places. But she says, I used to imagine that in a tyranny, people were united against their oppressors. But now I realize that tyranny turns people against one another, making some glad, even ecstatic, to witness the excessive punishment of those they have been taught to hate. And I think that's exactly what's going on in this case. People see the photos of the four men. They're rural Albertans. You know, they might look a little tougher, a little grubbier perhaps than a lot of rural Canadians. They definitely don't look like liberals, that's for sure. And I think it just plays into people's fears and it plays into their prejudices. And I think there's a lot of classism going on. I think there's a lot of hatred against working class people that's being fomented in the US and Canada these days. And also I kind of see it as a bit of a conflict between rural people and urban people.
Is this an extension of what's been happening in the US, do you think?
I think it's part of the culture war. Personally, that's the way I see it. Yeah. I feel like we're being divided. We're being divided into more extremes than ever. I mean, we've all seen it. I feel like the Trump era was like just absolutely insane. I feel like a lot of what's happening today is ramifications of that time, where everyone just got into one camp or the other.
Yeah.
And you could manipulate people just by telling them, hey, look, the other camp is doing this thing. And everyone would automatically say, well, we're just going to do the opposite then.
Yeah, you did see a lot of that. And it really astonishes me how it's like Trump is not that amazing of a figure. What amazes me is how much people hate him, but they hate him in an unrational way, like a completely irrational way. Like it's not, it's insane. And to see, like, I'm talking like people with reputations, like figures out there that have gone completely insane.
Who was it that said there was some like relatively, I think it was actually like a Hollywood celebrity that said, maybe it was one of those late night talk shows hosts, but somebody said, I don't care if Hunter Biden has sex slaves chained up in his basement as long as Trump isn't reelected.
Sam Harris. He's not even just a...
That was Sam Harris?
That was Sam Harris.
Oh, man.
That was, and we're talking about So for people in the audience that don't know who Sam Harris is, he's an intellectual. He's a neurophysicist. He's not a dummy.
Really intelligent guy.
Yeah, he's not a dummy.
Yeah, extremely intelligent guy, and it just went full blown TDS.
Lost his mind. TDS, Trump derangement syndrome. For those that are listening, don't know that, but it's crazy. It's crazy how like people went right over the deep edge, like in a real way.
I can't believe Sam Harris said that. That's incredible.
Yeah, it was Sam Harris. He was on the Trigonometry podcast, and they brought it up. They just said like, yeah, well, what about Hunter Biden? And he says, yeah, no, I don't care if he has dead children locked up in a cell in his basement.
And that's the era we live in.
Yeah,
it's like people just want their tribe to win. You know, that's the problem we have with Trudeau. I mean, how many scandals is this guy going to survive? I mean, do we have to prove that he's basically allowed the Chinese to create the COVID-19 bioweapon and kill millions of people? I feel like that's the next scandal.
It is the next scandal.
Survive it somehow.
It was on my list of things to talk about tonight, and I didn't get around to it. But
if you can survive 3 blackface photos, I mean, what else is there? I mean, a mild pandemic at this point is no big deal, right? For his supporters, they're going to find a way to justify it.
I don't know. I don't know how
it'll be all the same people who told us that, we had to lock the world down because it was such a deadly virus are now going to say, well, it actually wasn't that bad.
But I feel that, like, because there's a lot of doom and gloomers, right? There's a lot of people that say that the world's going to end. This is the end of it. I mean, every generation has that. Every generation has their group of people that say that this is the. It almost sounds like a conceited, like, self-important way of looking at the world. It's like, when the world ends, it's going to be in my generation. It's going to be my time that happens. A lot of these things have happened in the past and they've been pretty bad. I mean, obviously we went through 2 world wars. It was really awful. And like, there is pessimism. I think people are going, sorry, there's optimism. Like, people are way too pessimistic, I find, especially online characters. They go right for that black pill, like it's the end of the world. I think a lot of that is driven by the fact that you can generate clicks by predicting doom and gloom, and people realize this once they start seeing, like, how the social medias work. Oh, more people pay attention to me when I say that the sky's falling than when I don't, and I say everything's okay. And so
it's always been a thing, like the Bible has doomsayers. I think that's the expression for people who are predicting the end of the world. People were doing that 2,000 years ago and building, little cults around the end time prophecies. It's something that's just always existed.
Yeah, I remember several end time prophecies in my lifetime. I mean,
yeah,
like there was the Y2K. I think there was a few in the 90s.
The end of the Mayan calendar is another one.
That was another one, and like there's so many end time prophecies that have never taken place.
Heaven's Gate, I think, was another one.
Yeah, Heaven's Gate, with the Hale-Bopp comet. I mean, my parents lived through Jonestown. Like they weren't involved in it, but they were involved in some Christian ministry stuff right around that time, and they got weirded out by it and moved away. And it wasn't Jonestown, by the way, everybody, but it was another one like that, not like that, but a Christian ministry. But they moved away from it, and then the day that they got back to Canada, they read the Jonestown massacre in the newspaper. And like, holy cow! Like, this is insane. Like, what is all this stuff that's happening? So, like, a lot of weird stuff has happened over different generations, and there's been, like, psycho moments in history. Like, I think this, I believe, I can't remember the author of the book, but he wrote Mass Formation Psychosis, and it was this idea that the elements were all just right for COVID-19, and there was this mass formation.
Absolutely.
And people were whipped up into this thing, and certain people are susceptible to it, and other people are not. And because of this, so many people went batshit crazy, for lack of a better term. And the comparable events are like the Salem witch trials, when people, you're talking like old time America, and all of a sudden everybody believes that, like, there's witches, and you got to drown them to find out if they were witches or not. And it's like the trials were insane. If you read about what they did, it really is incredibly insane. But then what happens, though, is after a while society goes back to normal, and then people just kind of pretend that it never happened. Is that the direction you're going, or do you think that there's something else?
Like we're going back to normal, but I'm not sure where we're headed. It feels to me like the what am I trying to say? The tribalism. I don't feel like we're anywhere near getting to the point of coming back together and letting our differences subside. I feel like people are just deeply embedded into this tribalism right now, and it's not going away anytime soon, unfortunately.
Well, and I find that even people, even within their own groups these days, if there is no conflict, they'll find conflict. They'll find ways to conflict with each other. Even in groups that are in violent agreement with each other for months and months and all of that. And then they end up getting into these beefs or conflicts. And it's crazy. I've seen it time after time, even within like the freedom movement, or so-called quote unquote freedom movement, where people they're all in it for the same thing. and then it becomes like a cult of personality thing, and then they break off into their own little tribes. Is there some weird thing in the like the moon's in the right position? It makes us all ornery. We just want to scrap with each other. What is it?
I don't know. I think it's human nature. You know, I don't know if you've seen that documentary with what's her face, Jane, the young woman in the 1960s says she was a biologist or some type
Jane Goodall?
of scientist. Goodall, thank you. The documentary that came out a couple of years ago, where they show her just incredible disillusionment when she initially went out to study the orangutans. Were they
Chimpanzees?
Chimpanzees, thank you.
Yeah.
Yeah, she was an idealist, and she thought, you know, I'm going to leave horrible human civilization and go hang out with these chimpanzees and get back to nature. Little did she realize how violent they actually are. One group splintered off from the main group and started doing its own thing, and eventually the main group saw that other little group as a threat, and they ended up killing them all. But they didn't just kill them, they raped them, they defiled their corpses, they just went absolutely insane. And she was hiding in her tent the whole time, just afraid for her life. So and individually the chimps were really kind and loving, and she developed really incredible bonds with them. But as a group, you know, most days they were great, but
well, I think she crossed the line.
When they weren't great, they weren't great.
Well, I think she crossed the line a bit as a scientist, and she kind of, rather than studying them, she fell in love with them. She became part of their troop and all of this other stuff. But yeah, she was hesitant to. Her excuse was that she thought that she perhaps brought human nature to the chimp troop, and that it was her doing that caused.
She justified their behavior because it was her that inspired it. Is that
that was what she tried to justify it as? And I mean, obviously that was dismissed. Like most people looking at the study dismissed that and said no. And why would you hide this evidence because of your emotional attachment to these animals? So like some of her work was discredited because of it. Like some of her hypotheses based on it. Unfortunately, I mean that's unfortunate for her, but like the information that we actually got from it was groundbreaking, because we learned more about the behaviors of our cousins, you know, genetically, essentially, that they also have similar tendencies to want to war with each other, and in brutal fashions as well. Like not just I mean, chimpanzees are strong. They're about half the size of a human, but twice as strong. It's incredible the strength that they can. And when they fight each other, they literally rip each other apart.
Right.
Which is insane. I know.
Well, so we're doing better than that as a civilization. I've just within my lifetime, I've seen things really deteriorate. We're not killing each other over. We're not. It's not a civil war. It feels like it might be headed that way, but yeah. Unfortunately, we just can't seem to get along. We can't relate to people who are from the other tribe.
Mm-hmm.
Like it feels like politics has become a tribalistic culture.
Yeah, you're right.
So, and people on both sides are getting different sources of news and information, and they're building different narratives. And so, I mean, there's just a million examples of things that are going on where the gender thing is a good example, where one side is just going off in this direction and the other side's like, this doesn't even make any sense whatsoever, and the two are completely incompatible. Both sides, when you look at the people who are the most passionate on both sides, they both say the exact same things to each other. They're like, you're a cult, you're evil, and you're like, you should be locked up. And they literally say the exact same things to each other. It's distressing.
I find myself, I'm kind of fascinated with the whole concept of it, because I don't tend to think that people are evil in general, but I think that people are capable of amazing evil things, and like stuff that you'll read about in the Gulag archipelago, like things that people will work themselves into being able to do. And I feel like we're in a time like that, because you'll talk, like I always try, I'm always trying to bridge the gap, because naturally I want conflict resolution at the end of the day. Like I don't want to live in a warring society. I don't want to live in a place where we're constantly at odds with each other. It's stressful. It's not going to lead to a good retirement. It's not going to lead to a good life for my kids, all of that stuff. So I'm always leaning towards conflict resolution. And in that, I try to reach across the aisle. And I find that there are certain things that as soon as you say a particular word, it'll trigger people on the other side. I think the term for it is a shibboleth. It's a phrase or an idea that is associated with a group. So say, for example, if I start talking a shibboleth, it's I know it's a strange word, but
Interesting. I haven't heard that one.
Yeah, so it's an identifier. It's a marker for groups. So if you hear somebody speaking certain words or saying a certain term, a phrase or something like that, you'll immediately go, that guy's in my group, or he's not in my group.
Right.
Based on those things. So if you say stuff like conformity and capitalism and all these things, you'd immediately think, oh, this guy's a lefty. He's, I could basically break it down where he stands politically. If he says things like free market and, the typical conservative words.
Freedom.
Yeah, freedom, that kind of stuff. Liberty. That breaks them. Those are shibboleths that would break them into another category. And what people use that for is a mark identifier to know who's their enemy in today's society, just in basic conversation. So what I try to do when talking to people that I know are on the other side of the aisle is I'll try to refrain from using particular terms that would be shibboleths of what's seen as the right, right? 'Cause I don't know if I'm even that far right. Like I think I'm very centrist. I'm libertarian. I let everybody know my point of view. I'm socially liberal, pretty fiscally conservative. I'm kind of just right in the middle. I'm not one way or the other.
Right.
But compared to where it's going right now, it's going crazy on both ends. So where do you even stand compared to the person observing, right? It's almost like political relativism, or what I mean. It depends on it's relativity, right? So it depends on the observer on what the other outside is politically. But I'll find myself trying to avoid
even masks. Like during COVID, masks became a form of that signaling.
That's right. They were a shibboleth.
Tribe you belong to. Yeah, big time.
So either you wore a mask or you didn't, and you were either, trying to, from their perspective, you're trying to save the world, and these people are evil, awful people that are trying to infect everybody. This is genuinely how people thought. Like this was I can't get in people's thoughts, but I can, this is what they're expressing out loud. So if that's what they're expressing out loud, I would just assume that that's what they're thinking. And then the other side, you go right onto the other side. Anybody who wears a mask is a sheep, and they don't have control of their own thoughts, and they're awful people themselves,
and
right?
People on the right, or people within the freedom movement, will actually get triggered by somebody wearing a mask.
Yeah. And it's interesting. I remember this.
Had it happen to me. I was at a freedom rally in Nelson. And I was walking down the sidewalk with a mask on, after the rally, because it was peak COVID times. And I was with my girlfriend and her daughter, and we were all wearing masks because that's what people were doing at the time.
Right.
And a friend of mine, literally a friend of mine, saw me and just freaked out on me.
Really?
Just went absolutely ape shit in front of my girlfriend's daughter. It was a bit distressing for her. So when I heard of people in Ottawa, I heard that people were getting yelled at Ottawa for wearing masks. I totally believed it because my own friend did the same thing to me.
Right. It was happening everywhere.
So it goes both ways.
Yeah, it does go both ways. And it's weird, like, and I cringe to think of it. Like, the, I know people, part of their employment was you go home for the day if you don't want to wear a mask. And it's like, okay, well, I got to do this thing. So they just do the thing so they can get their paycheck at the end of the week, right? A lot of people were put in that sort of predicament, and not everybody's a hero, right? Not everybody's a hero, and maybe that's not their hill to die on. So they went along with it. And I know that that's a large part of the problem is people just going along with it. But where do you take a stand? Where's the right place to take a stand? And is it other people's um is it their position to deem what hill you should die on? You know what I mean?
Yeah. Well, and I mean, specifically to the masks, I mean, COVID, you can't stop COVID by wearing a mask because it's an airborne virus.
Right.
Had it been a droplet virus, then masks might have actually helped, probably nominally, but they might have helped a little bit. So I guess my point is that in another scenario, masks actually might have made more sense.
In another scenario, yeah.
And there was a time before we understood what type of a virus we were dealing with, where I think it was prudent to wear a mask.
That reminds me of another thing that Sam Harris said in that same podcast. Maybe it was another podcast, but he said, "Oh, if things were different, if it was a virus that was more pathogenic, and if it was
He
a
loved thought
virus,
experiments.
yeah, if it was a virus that targeted children, I think people would respond differently." It's like, well, yeah.
Well, yeah, thanks, Sam.
Thanks, buddy. Great.
Wow, thank you for taking us on that journey. Yeah,
Yeah.
and if people had guns pointed at our heads, we might
Yeah, of
feel
course.
differently as well.
If all the things were the right way like if all the things lined up to match your response to it, then you would have been justified, but
Yeah.
you were not. And that's where it comes down. It really comes down to that. But getting back to this, so the Coutts 4, because it's such an unusual story, that, 4 guys were held in jail for 2 years, and now 2 of them were let go. Can you tell me about that? Like, why were they let go?
Yeah,
Under what
yeah.
circumstances?
Thanks for bringing us back there because that's a really important point. Like I was saying earlier, the 4 of them were denied bail on the basis that releasing them would bring disrepute upon the justice system because the crimes they were accused of were so severe. Just recently, 2 of them were allowed to plead out on drastically reduced charges. The most important charge was the conspiracy to commit murder. They were accused of plotting to kill RCMP. Those charges were taken right off the table, which for a lot of people, including myself, is an indication that those charges were bunked to begin with. I mean, either these guys wanted to kill cops, in which case they should be prosecuted,
Mm-hmm.
or they didn't want to kill cops, so they never should have been held for 2 years without bail. Can't have it both ways.
Now, if that's the case, why would 2 of them still be in?
So I suppose it depends on how you look at it. You might assume that there's stronger evidence against the other 2. From what I know from the people who support them, their friends and family, their close friends and family, I think it's more of a case that those 2 are just determined to fight. They're determined to fight for their innocence. They don't want to plead out. They want to prove that the government was wrong,
Hmm.
and they're willing to fight. they're I don't know about Chris Cartwright, but Tony is facing a total of I believe 75 years potentially. So yeah, yeah. So he's playing a dangerous game, but that's how confident he is, how confident he must be that he is innocent and he can prove it.
That's crazy. 75 years for something that, I mean, essentially was BS. Or it sounds like it was BS. I mean, I can't
Yeah,
know for sure because we don't have many of the details. Like, that's the problem.
there's a lot of details, and it's also hard because there's so much I want to say right now, and it's hard to remember what is open source information and what is stuff that's come up in the hearings. But he has an extra charge that none of the other men had, and I don't know if I can really get into it, but let's just say that some additional evidence was found in his personal property, which I believe is like at least an hour away from where he was arrested at the protest.
Mm.
It's also worth mentioning that another one of the men, Jerry, him and his wife were on their way home to Olds, Alberta, which is quite a ways away, at least I think an hour and a half, maybe 2 hours away. So they'd actually gone all the way home, but on their way home, they recorded a Facebook Live. And Jerry, at some point, they were encouraging people to come to the border. They're actually saying, "We've been at the border at this protest. Now we're on our way home because we have to go back to work. We have no intention of going back to the protest, but we're encouraging our friends to go hold the line. So please go down and take a stand." And they literally said, we're not talking about like violence or anything. We're just talking about being there and taking a stand. But at one point, Jerry used the expression, "This is war." And that apparently has been used as evidence against him.
Right.
So these guys went home, they went to bed, they got up, they both were on their way to work, and Jerry got picked up, and then his wife Jacqueline went to the police station, and she got arrested. And meanwhile, the RCMP went to their home and obtained their legally registered and stored firearms and collected them as evidence. So I don't know if any of those firearms are the part of the ones on the table,
Right.
but that's an example. There's a lot of examples of things in this case. The more you dig in, the more it's just like, what is going on? It doesn't make sense. There's a lot that just doesn't make sense, and it just doesn't pass the smell test.
So from here, where do we stand? There's two of them that are still in. Two of them are done. I guess they're done. They've pled out to lesser crimes. What were the lesser crimes?
It was more to do with just like improper storage of a firearm. Like really, I think they both had slightly different crimes that they confessed to, if you will. And in both cases, the sentence was equivalent to the time they served in remand. So when you spend time in remand, because it is so much more terrible than jail, it's actually, we could get into that too as a whole other thing, but remand is actually worse than jail. So when you spend time in remand, it counts for 1.5.
Mm-hmm.
So they spent like almost 2 years in a remand. So they were sentenced to 3 years in jail. So in other words, time served. But even the 3 years in jail for the crimes that they pled guilty to, it's just a ridiculous sentence. So it's just another example of just none of it adds up at all. It's all just crazy.
No, and because they pled out, they're probably not able to sue for the time that they spent. Or
Exactly. So one of the men, Chris Lysak, he's free and clear. I guess it's not fair to say that when he's still drowning in debt. I think he has probably at least $100,000 in debt still. So hopefully fundraising will take care of that.
well, in 2 years of not paying his mortgage or things like that, right? This is like that's crazy.
Yeah, lost time with his kids and family and friends. Yeah, yeah. The other man, Jerry, from what I understand, his plea deal isn't quite as generous. So he's not necessarily free and clear. There's a possibility he might have to testify. So yeah, that might be problematic. I really hope that that's not forced on him, because he hasn't had an easy time.
Fair enough. And so for the other two, what's the outlook on that?
Well, that's hard to gauge. I mean, I don't, I'm not privy to enough of the evidence to be able to make a determination what I think the odds are of them being exonerated. They both seem pretty positive for men that are stuck in what I would refer to as little cages with other men who are withdrawing from drugs and who knows what else.
You know, but is there a court date set? Like, is this something that they might?
Yeah, their actual trial is in the summer, so there's still a bunch of hearings between now and then. I think there's like 2 weeks of hearings in the next month.
Okay.
And I believe the trial starts in May.
So they will have their day in court, and this is a thing.
Oh yeah, yeah.
Well, I'm interested to find out.
So my theory is, from what I've heard, I believe that my theory is that they would have been offered plea deals by now, but I think that they've kind of let it be known all along that that's not something they're interested in. So,
wow, that's some devotion right there. So that's incredible.
Yeah, and I really think there's a lot in their favor that wasn't meant to be. Like, there's a lot of people supporting them that really have their backs and keeping them strong. And I just think the government probably overplayed their hand. They use them. This is just my theory, of course. I'm just theorizing. But in my theory, they were used to justify the Emergencies Act. And the idea was, we'll just accuse them of something terrible. Everyone will think they're evil. We'll hold them in remand centers for as long as it takes to break them, which, speaking for myself, probably would have been maybe 3 or 4 days.
Yeah.
And I would have fled to pretty much anything.
Right.
Seriously.
It's not easy.
Like, I'm not even joking. Like, I can't even imagine like a weekend in that situation.
Right.
So, yeah. So I believe they were meant to have been broken by now. That was the plan.
But they didn't break. That's crazy.
They didn't break. It's hard to, like, if you think about it, like, if you commit a crime, you get arrested, then you're released on bail, and you know that you're gonna get arrested again, and you're gonna have a trial. That's one scenario. If you're just at a protest and you get arrested and you never, like, that's it. Like, you're in a remand center, and then years go by. You never go home. You never step outside. You never, like, that's it. It's hard to fathom.
It's crazy. And I hope they get a trial that's fair. So if they did commit crimes, of course, you commit a crime, you pay the price for the crimes committed. But I hope they see a fair trial, and it doesn't end up as some kangaroo court scenario where they don't get good representation or something like that. I hope. I'm serious when I say this. I want to afford even my political enemies this like, throw that out. I think everybody deserves a fair trial, even the most heinous people in our society, because this is how we make society fair, is that everybody gets that. So I hope to break that sentiment that we're getting, the vitriol that we see or hear from people. I hope I break by taking the position first, that anybody who you're even opposed to gets fair, equal treatment under the law. And that's what we should all hope for. And I believe that wholeheartedly. I'm going to get to some of these super chats before we close the stream out. I want you to stick around, because there's still some more things I want to chat with you about. But I'm going to get to some of these super chats. Where were we? There's a whole pile here. I just don't want to miss any of them. We've got too many to mention here. From a point of freedom, of course, from Patch Duress, 279 super chat. From a point of freedom, of course. Patch Duress also for the 699 super chat says it's a semantics thing. Perhaps our founders wanted to be more polite. Another reason for why our culture and politics have been compromised. Talking about what we were talking about before, the U.S. Canada relations thing. I think U.S. largely, they like us, like, hey, little guys over there, you know. But,
Sure.
but I never understood the animosity towards the States. I like America. I think it's great.
No,
It's amazing. I think
it's the most creative and innovative country in the history of the world.
It's fantastic.
I'll just say that.
I mean, you can find dicks anywhere you go. I mean, that's just a matter of fact. But we have dicks here too, so let's just compare that way. I'm not your buddy guy with a $5 super chat. Too many Canadians look down their noses at U.S. failing to realize without their military, our country would be expanded living space for China. That's funny. I'm not your buddy guy also with a $2 super chat saying the process is the punishment. One more super chat for $5 says,
yes,
this type of rural versus urban conflict dates back to even the days of Julius Caesar in Rome. Heck, Marcus Aurelius.
The word pagan, the actual word pagan actually originally meant person from the countryside.
Is that right? I didn't know that. He says that Marcus Aurelius remarked on it in his meditations. I'd like to read into some of that. There's some crazy stuff that is like paralleling. I know a lot of people are talking about this. The fall of Rome is on everybody's mind, but there's a lot of parallels from what happened in their society, as well as Greek society. What went down with Socrates, for example. That really crazy. Voven with a $5 super chat. Clyde, the pessimism is driven by personally experiencing this stuff instead of talking about it from a distance. Your perspective changes quickly. Yeah, that's fair. That's a fair thing to say. I'm not your buddy guy with a $5 super chat says it's because they are Malthusian. They're okay with culling people. Many of these elites see humans as a virus that is killing the planet. Malthus obviously was a mathematician who had the theory that we're going to be overpopulated by, I believe, the 1960s. Never came to fruition. Another death cult that we were talking about earlier, more predictions that don't happen, but they still believe it anyway. Nonsense. Patch Duress with a $13.99 super chat. Sorry, I don't agree with the "it's my tribe" argument. Anyone who watches Clyde and our other independent new media still have the sense to know one side is cuckoo over for Cocoa Puffs, i.e. leftism, the devil. But I do think that there's a lot of people that are...
The other side will say the same about this side.
Yeah,
so.
That's true. They will say that about us. So, and I think people, there is redemption there. Like some people are so far gone, I don't know what you do with them. But then, you know, there's so much redemption to be had, and I really hope for a conflict resolution in our own society. Jess 44 with a $6.99 super sticker with the happy little fox there. Dana Wick with a $10 super chat. The U.S. with all their gun violence live in fear, just like a few years ago at the Stampede. Someone asked a Texas sheriff how he liked it, and he said he would have shot him. they in fear. Oh, okay. Yeah, well, it's a totally different world over there, I suppose. Patch S, $6.99 super chat. I'll admit if I didn't live in Japan prior to COVID, I'd automatically think masked people are sheep, although they probably they just voted for Trudeau. Now, that's interesting. I lived in Japan as well, and when I see people wearing masks, I don't think they're fearful of other people. I think that there's two reasons why people wear masks in Japan. One is hay fever season. The pollen it's crazy. There's so much pollen in Japan, so they'll wear the masks to keep the pollen out of their nose. And The other reason is if they get sick, they want to keep the droplets in their mask, and it's a politeness thing for everybody else to not be coughing, especially in mass transit, that kind of thing. I'm not your buddy guy with another $5 super chat. True evil exists when the media lies to you. What you do to what do you call that? Or when you force medical experimentation or lock up pastors for holding church. Yes, evil does exist. Evil does exist, and but it exists. It's these things that bring it out in good people. I think good people are capable of real evil things. They just have to be brought there. It really is that. Nux for Cup with a $5 super chat. The success in the USA are possible because of their freedoms. They have that we thought we also had until Trudeau showed us we don't. Yeah, that's true. The Constitution is a brilliant document, and it saved them from despotic, warlord-esque type presidents and members of Congress for many of years, and hopefully it'll hold them back a little bit longer, and maybe they can elect somebody or a group of somebodies that will bring it back to and restore it to its original glory. But at this point in time, it's not very savory. Let's just say that it's not very savory. So that's the end of the super chats. Thanks so much for joining me tonight, Stevland. It's
thank you, Clyde.
Amazing to have these conversations and talk more about things, a little bit more of the nitty gritty, different people's point of views about all these. Not just the Coutts 4, but like your opinions on these other things. It's refreshing to hear, and thank you for having this conversation with me.
It's a very relaxed environment that you create, and you have a great vibe, and I really enjoyed our chat, and I really appreciate the opportunity to talk a little bit more about the Coutts 4.
Yeah, where can people find you on social media, places like that?
Yeah, I suppose Stevland Ambrose on Twitter. That's my main thing. So
that's the mainstay. Okay, well, we'll plug that then. Stevland Ambrose on Twitter. Get over there. Great stuff, great tweets, great stories. Out there, actually checking out the situations, not just talking about it from the sidelines, maybe like I do. But I admire it. I admire what you do, and this is why I have you on. And I love chatting with you. For everybody else,
thank you so much. It's cool admiration.
Perfect. And for everybody else watching, thank you all for coming. Thank you for enjoying these conversations and hanging out. Love to do this stuff with you guys. We'll be back again Monday morning for the usual video that we put out. And well, everybody keep on trucking.